Simon Says Stamp July 2023 Flower Happy Card Kit has just arrived, and I've been going through all of the beautiful pieces of this kit. I think I'm going to make 2 or maybe even 3 different parts to this video series, and so stay tuned for those links. I will add them to the video description box below as those additional videos become available. Today, let's go ahead and get started with our first set of cards. For this card, I decided to use these 2 pattern papers together. I thought that they went together beautifully and would work really well with a craft colored card base. So I'm starting out by cutting and scoring an A2 size card base, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And then from the Tim Holtz strip collection, I pulled out these 3 strips primarily because of their color, but also I really liked how they blended really well with these 2 papers. So these 3 are from the green part of the kit. There's also some that are more pink or blue that you could also use with this, but I thought that the green worked really well with these 2 papers. So let's go ahead and start building this card. I'm going to build it right on the card base. So these 2 papers that I picked are both directional papers, meaning that depending on how you cut them, they're either going to be upright on your card or upside down or sideways. So in this case, these 2 papers are of a vertical orientation, so I need to pay attention to that when I'm cutting. I wanted my card to be a horizontal A2 card, so when I cut my directional papers, I want to make sure that I'm aware of that and cutting them in the right direction. The green pattern paper is going to be along the top of our card. So what I'm going to do is cut this first one down to 2 1/2. And that's with my flowers facing sideways. So 2 1/2. And then I'm going to turn it with my flowers facing upright, and I'm going to cut it down to 5 1/2. I'm going to do the same thing with this patterned paper. I'm going to turn my diamonds sideways, and I'm going to cut it at 2 inches. And then rotate it so my diamonds are upright and cut that also at 5 1/2. Okay, I'm going to start by adhering the diamond paper to the bottom of my card base. I'm making sure that my fold is along the top, and I've added some of the Simon Says Stamp dot runner that comes in the July kit, and I'm just going to add that to the bottom of my card base, making sure that my edges are all lined up nicely. And then I'm going to add the green paper, lining the top edge up with the top of the card base, and you'll see here that it's going to overlap slightly with the diamond paper. So I'm just lining up my top edge and my left edge. When I glue 2 papers next to each other, I like to connect them with a third element, usually in the form of a strip of paper that matches both. In this case, I went into my stash and pulled out a piece of the matte gold cardstock from Simon Says Stamp. This actually came in the June Simon Says Stamp card kit, and I had some extra. So I just cut a little strip of it, and what I'm going to do is glue it so that it joins these 2 pieces of paper together. And I like to cut my narrow strips a little longer than my finished product, and that's so that it extends off the sides of the card, and I can trim them to the exact dimensions of my finished card. And then what I like to do is I use a dry baby wipe to pick up any of that excess glue that seeps out from underneath, and I just leave my baby wipes out overnight, and they create kind of this nice, dry, lint-free cloth that I can use to help me with the glue. All right, so I've adhered that, and then I'm going to come back in and trim off the excess. Like that. Okay, now I want to heat emboss our sentiment in this light green area, and so I'm going to use my mini Misty to do that. For my card design, I plan on putting 3 graphical elements along this strip of cardstock. And so what I want to do is have my sentiment centered left and right but a little bit higher on my card. So what I'm going to do is treat my card with anti-static powder first, so that my embossing powder only goes where the ink is placed. And then I'm going to use my watermark pad from Versamark. Stamp. I'm going to ink that up one more time. So I'm going to use Brutus Monroe's Gilded Gold embossing powder. I thought it went really well with that strip of gold cardstock. And I'm just using a coffee filter to catch my excess powder. Makes it really easy to put it back in my container. And you can see I got a really nice impression, so I won't have to come back in and restamp it. All right, let me go ahead and heat emboss this. From the strips that I pulled out from the card kit, I thought it would be fun to include pieces of them. So I went into my stash and I pulled out a square punch. This one's 1 1/4 inches, and I'm just going to punch squares in areas of interest, right? So here I really like that butterfly and kind of that green strip above. So I'm just going to line it up and punch that out. And then I liked on this one, I liked this cute little bird. So I'm going to do the same thing. On this strip, I'm going to cut this part right here because it has a little bit of the pink to pull in from the diamond paper below. So I just wanted to add these. Now, I need to mat them so that they stand out from the diamond paper underneath. So I'm going to use another punch that is 1 1/2 inches so that I can stack them up. And I think what I'm going to do is pull a little bit more of this gold. So again, I'm going back into my stash and I'm going to pull this same gold cardstock. So I'm going to cut 3 of these gold squares to mat our little elements from the strip paper that we cut. And so now if I stack them together, you see they kind of bounce off the page. So I'm going to use some foam adhesive, I think, to give them some dimension. So I'm going to ink my edges here just a little bit so that I don't have that kind of white cut edge that my little square punch left behind. So I'm just adding a little bit of, this is the Gathered Twigs Distress Oxide ink, but you can use any distressing ink that you might have on hand. Okay, and then I know I want to pop them up with a little bit of foam. So I've just cut down some pieces of sheet foam. You might find it in your craft store and it's called Fun Foam, and usually you find it in the kids section. I do know that Simon Says Stamp now has sheet foam in their catalog as well that you can use. I think they call it pop-up foam. I'm just going to trim that down a little bit. And what I like about the using sheet foam for larger pieces is it tends to be much more stable. And then I'm going to add these to those gold squares above. I'm really loving this tape runner, or dot runner, I think they call it, from Simon. It really covers nice and even sticks to the foam, which traditionally is a little bit more difficult to do. Okay, so I'm just going to add these to our little foam squares, just centering them. And then I think because the foam or the gold cardstock also has a white core, I'm just going to use my same distress brush and come in around those edges as well, just to get rid of that little bit of that white edge. And now I can add these three elements to the card. What I want to do is center it over this gold strip of cardstock and then equally space them across. So something like that, I think. So I'm going to go back to my wet glue so that I have a little bit of time to move around my squares if I need to, just to center them. And I'm going to use my Simon T ruler just to make sure that they're straight. I'm just going to center this one left and right. Okay, and now I can add my other two. Centering each one between the distance that's left. And my cute little bird. I really love that these distress strips are so, I don't know, I think they're so unique. I think you could use them in a lot of different ways. But I loved the colors in them, and I think they're like intended to be a rainbow order maybe. And because they included all of these colors, which was really nice. And then for the envelope, I want to also tie that in as well. And so I'm going back to the green paper that we used before, and I'm just going to cut a very narrow strip of it. I'm thinking maybe a 1/4 inch. And I still have plenty to do another card. And then maybe even a little strip again of this gold. Just going to add these strips right to the edge of my envelope with some wet glue. I'm going to take it right to that left edge. And then do the same with my little strip of gold. And then I'm just going to add them right next to each other. So you get that nice finished look, and then wipe up any of that excess glue. And then I can come back and turn it over, and I can see exactly where I need to trim. And now I have my finished card and a matching envelope. For my next card, I decided to use these two beautiful papers from the card kit, the beautiful rose and then this tone-on-tone pink diamond paper. And then also a couple of the pink strips from the Tim Holtz pack, and also the rose gold foil paper from Simon that's also included in the kit. And then as our card base, I'm going to use a 1/2 sheet of the cream colored cardstock that also comes in the kit. All right, let's start by doing our card base. This is 4 1/4 by 11, which is a 1/2 sheet of 8 1/2 by 11 cardstock. And I'm just going to score this in half at 5 1/2. And then get this ready. We're actually going to build our card on the card base today and not use a card panel. When I looked at these two papers, the rose paper to me was kind of the star of the show. So that's going to be the focal point of this card. This pink is going to be more of an accent. So I'm going to start by cutting down this patterned paper, and I'm just going to trim off this end strip. And then I want to cut a piece that is 3 1/2 tall by 3 3/4 inches wide. So my first cut is going to be at 3 1/2. And then I'm going to turn it once so that the long side is in my cutter, and I'm going to cut at 3 3/4. So again, our first cut was at 3 1/2. I rotated it once, and then our final cut was at 3 3/4. Now what we're going to do is cut this piece into 3 panels. So we're going to start by cutting the first one at 1 1/4. Set that aside, and then we're going to cut this one again at 1 1/4. And what you're left with are 3 equal pieces of paper that when put together, you can still see the image from the original piece of cardstock. So I'm just going to set these aside. I do want to keep them in the order I cut them, and that will become clear as we start to build our card. And then the next piece of paper we want to cut is 4 by 1 3/4. So I'm just going to cut the 1 3/4 first, rotate, and then cut at 4. All right, let's start building this cute card. So I'm bringing back in my card base. All right, so to start off with, we're going to go ahead and glue in our base piece. This is the pink. And again, the measurement on this is 1 3/4 by 4. And I'm just going to build this right on my card base. And what I want to do is make sure I want a top folding card, so my fold is along the top. And I just want to leave an equal border on left, bottom, and right. And it's about an 1/8 inch border all the way around. So take your time on this step, make sure that it's straight. And I'm just going to bring out my T-ruler just to make sure. Yep, it's nice and straight. And now I want to glue each one of these panels in order and leave that same border in between. So the easiest way to do this is to start with one panel, and I'm going to switch to wet glue because I do want to have a moment to move it around. And so I'm going to start with my left-hand panel. And I want to have this same border along the left and the top. And again, this is where that wet glue gives me a moment of open time just to move it into place. And your papers will slightly overlap or just butt up to each other here. Then I'm going to skip the next piece, which is actually this one. So again, we're keeping our visual pattern in order, and we're going to move to the third piece. And I'll explain why in a minute. I guess it will become clearer, but I'm going to do the same thing with this side, only now I'm lining up the right edge and having that same border on the right and the top. Okay, and so the reason why I did that is so that when I come in with my third and final piece, it's easier to center in between these three than it is for me to try to go in order. So now I know exactly where those pieces need to glue in. All right, so again, I'm just centering that. And my wet glue allows me to kind of wiggle it around ever so slightly and just make sure that it's straight. All right, and then this is a style thing, but it's certainly something I like to do a lot. Anytime I glue two pieces of paper together, I like to join them or connect them with something else. So some other type of paper, sticker, ephemera. And in this case, I think I'm going to use this beautiful rose gold cardstock. And so I'm just going to trim down a strip that is maybe just shy of 1/4 inch wide. And then I'm going to trim this down to 4 inches. Then this little piece is going to get glued right on top of where those papers come together, and it kind of visually connects them. So again, I'm just covering that seam where those papers meet. I'm going to use my T-ruler just to make sure that my strip is straight, and then I'm using my dry baby wipe to come in and give that a good press and make sure that all that excess glue is picked up. From my stash, I pulled out this Layered Butterflies die set by FAWN, and I die cut out the smallest butterfly from some of that rose gold cardstock. And I'm just going to punch out all of these little inside pieces, and this is going to become an embellishment for the front of our card. What I like about Simon's card kits is they put together products that you wouldn't necessarily put together on your own. So it stretches your creativity and helps kind of challenge you to work with different products. But I do end up pulling from my stash some additional pieces, and that's just a personal preference. If you want to use exactly what's inside the kit only, then you can get a little bit more creative maybe with the pieces that are included in that kit. Okay, so here's our beautiful butterfly, and then here's also the centerpiece of the butterfly. I'm just going to glue this on the front. Just going to layer this in. This is the prettiest butterfly die. I just love it. It also includes like the solid background piece if you want to layer it. I went ahead and used the outline butterfly die and cut a piece out of vellum, and now I want to glue my butterfly onto this vellum piece just for some added interest and dimension. Once that dries, I can kind of pop up those wings. Okay, now back to my card. I think I had originally intended to use these strips and ultimately decided not to. I'm going to save them for another card. But I want to emboss my sentiment. And so I'm going to use my Misty. I'm just going to center it top and bottom, left and right. That's pretty good. And then use my anti-static powder on the cardstock. And then I'm going to ink it up with some Versamark. Then I'm going to use Nouveau embossing powder. This is in the color Crimson. I thought this went really well with the floral paper and really pulled out these kind of deepish shades of pink. Going to tap off my excess, and I think that looks pretty good. Now I'm just going to heat set this. And then as you can see, my card has warped a little bit with the heat gun, and the way I get around that is I run it back through my Gemini. As soon as my embossing powder has cooled off, I can go ahead and put it within my cutting plates. I put a piece of clean copy paper over top, and now I'm just going to run this through my Gemini. All right, and that fixed most of our warping problem. Okay, and then to finish off this card, I want to bring my butterfly back in, and now that the vellum has dried in the back, I'm just going to fluff up my wings just a tiny bit and then glue this cute little butterfly right there along the left-hand side. And for that, I'm going to use just some of the Simon Says stamp dots from the dot runner. And then I'm popping it right between the gap in these two panels. I kind of like it a little off center, and then you can pop up the wings. And then from my stash, I'm just going to grab some of these are by Studio Katia. These are called Clear Drops. And I think it would be fun just to add a few of these just for some added interest. And I think I'll put maybe 3 kind of off to this side, and then maybe a couple more down here. And I like that this set comes with a variety of sizes, so you can kind of mix it up. Okay, I'll go ahead and glue these down. And they will show as white right now until my art glitter glue dries, and then they will be clear. Okay, and then let me finish my envelope while this dries. I just want to coordinate my envelope with the card, so I cut another strip of the pink diamonds and then a little piece of the rose gold paper, and I'm just going to glue these along the edge of the envelope. And then use my dry baby wipe to pick up that excess glue. And then I'm just going to add my rose gold strip. And then trim off the excess. And that completes our card. For our next card, I chose this beautiful blue tone-on-tone floral patterned paper from the kit. And then I have a white card base, A2 size. And this time I have a side folding card, but you could adapt this for a top folding card just the same. And then I've chosen a couple of the strips from the Tim Holtz strip collection that have these kind of blue tones in it. And I also have a blue embossing powder by Zing, as well as our stamp sets. You could also, instead of heat embossing our sentiment, you could also use a blue ink. What I wanted to do with this card was use the patterns contained in these strips kind of in a different sort of way. So rather than just applying them straight on the card, I thought, what if we cut them into different shapes? And I have a hexagon punch in my stash that I've really been enjoying using. It's very much on trend, and I think could really add to the design of this card. So I thought the first thing I would do is add my card panel to the card base, and I'm just using the dot runner from the kit, and then add this to my card front. Okay, then I wanted to take that hexagon punch and these strips and then creatively cut out places in the strip that either had the color I was trying to incorporate or maybe a nice texture or pattern. And so here I know I want to grab these cute little flowers, and they don't have to be centered. But if you do want to get closer in to one of the patterns, you can kind of cut away a little bit of the strip so that you can get your punch in there a little bit tighter. So here I've just cut away a little bit of that strip so that my punch goes in further, and then I can punch that flower. I love this house. I think that's such a cool image to capture, so I'm going to grab that. And I think I'm going to grab about 10 or maybe 12 of these little hexagons in, again, varying colors and textures. I love this piece right here because of the blue, so I am going to grab that. And then also these beautiful little flowers right here I think go really well with the paper. Here's a beautiful one with trees and another floral with a bird. So I'm just going to keep going like that until I have several different images that I can choose from. I may cut more if I find as I place them that I need something with a little bit deeper color or some additional texture. Okay, now I want to place my hexagons in a way that I was thinking would kind of cascade from the top left corner kind of down the right side of the card, and then we'll place our sentiment in this lower section of the card front. So I'm just going to start by placing my hexagons kind of in a cascading format, and here is where you want to kind of vary your patterns and colors, I think, a little bit, and then we'll work to add some dimension as well. We'll pop some of them up. So here's a pretty little flower. I think I want to put that one in there, and then maybe this one. You might want to take, as you kind of work through this, you might want to take a photo of your arrangement just so that when you go to glue them down, you remember where they went. And so here I have kind of two flowers next to each other. I think I'm going to swap these around a little bit. And I like that arrangement. Let me add one more maybe. And then I thought from the stamp set we would use this Hello Friend stamp. And so I do want to leave room for my sentiment. So I think I'm going to slide those over there. I'm thinking my sentiment might go really nicely right about there. And so here is where I can shift around some of my design to allow for that. Okay, I like that placement. Now I think what I want to do is pop some of these up and give it some added dimension. You could do this with foam dots, or as I like to do, any chance I get, I like to use a paper buildup instead of foam. I think it's a lot more structurally sound for your card. It looks nicer from the side. I cut out a bunch of white cardstock hexagons in the exact same size as our ephemera, and I like to build these up by gluing several layers together. And if you use wet glue, you will have, again, that wiggle room that we talked about with some of our other cards, where you can line up your shapes just perfectly before the glue sets. You want to make sure, if you're going to do this technique of building up for dimension using paper, that all your edges line up, or you're kind of defeating the purpose of the clean look that you get when you use this instead of foam. So I think I'm going to do 3 stacked together at first. I may want some to be higher. I want some maybe to be the level of the paper, so direct to paper. I'm just going to go ahead and glue a bunch of these together and be right back, and then we'll go ahead and finalize our design. Okay, I went ahead and glued all of my hexagons together, and I just have a quick tip for you. If some of your edges don't quite line up, you can use a nail file to just go around the image and very slightly file down those little extra edges that protrude. Here's a really good example of where the edges aren't quite lined up. And if you just use your little nail file, it ends up kind of filing away just that little extra bit of paper. One other thing I want to mention before I glue all of these down, you can see that I've put my hexagon in an orientation with the point facing up. You could also do it with the flat side pointing up, but whatever orientation you want to do, you might want to be aware of that as you're punching your shapes, so that those that are, like this house is a really good example, right? We wouldn't want the house to be sideways, so I wanted to have my points facing up, so when I punched it, I lined it up so that punch was facing up as well. So in some of the more intricate patterns, I don't think it matters as much, but if you have something like a bird, a flower, a house, you might want it facing upright. All right, so now I'm just going to glue some of these ephemera pieces that we punched out of those beautiful strips to the hexagon papers that we stacked up. And you can see you get a nice finished edge all the way around. Some I may pop up more than others. You know, I may even have some that are glued direct to our card base. Again, I'm just looking for added dimension here. And I think the stacked paper really lends itself to that. So I went ahead and stacked each of the hexagons with at least one layer of the cardstock behind. I didn't particularly care for the shape being completely flat to the paper. And so what I ended up doing was layering some more than others. So as you can see here, they have varying heights. And I really like how that kind of added extra interest and dimension. And then before you glue these down, this is kind of your last opportunity to decide, do I like the patterns that I've chosen? Do I like how the colors are varied? Do I want to switch any of them out? I did cut some extras just in case. And so again, this is kind of your last opportunity to make any of those kind of changes. So I think I like that format. I think maybe let me switch one. I think I want a little bit darker blue down below maybe. Yeah, I think that looks nice. So I have one that's raised really high, several that are kind of in between, and then others that just have just the one layer. And what you end up with is a nice variation. I have 3 more here. We'll use those on the inside of the card later. And then before we glue these down, I want to go ahead and stamp and emboss the sentiment. Now let's go ahead and work with our sentiment. So I'm going to move these off and then bring in my mini Misty. And then I do know I want my sentiment in this lower right-hand corner. So I'm just going to line that up. The reason why I wait until my card front is added to the card panel to do my heat embossing is it minimizes the warp that you get from the heat gun if the paper's a little thicker. And so I usually wait until the card is kind of somewhat put together. All right, now I'm going to treat that patterned paper with some anti-static powder. This is just an old powder bag. I think it's from Stampin' Up. Yours may look different, but it really is an important step when you're embossing to make sure that you're treating your paper with that anti-static powder. It helps minimize those little tiny particles from your embossing powder from going where you don't want them. And if that happens and you heat set it, there's no way to remove it. Okay, I'm inking that up with some Versamark ink and giving it just slight pressure. I'm going to ink that up one more time. And then I thought that this blue embossing powder would look really, really good with the patterned paper. So again, this is by Zing, and I can't read the color at the moment, but I will, it might be Cobalt. I will go ahead and link this up in the video description box if I'm able to find it. But again, I think any blue ink or other embossing powder would work just fine. So here I'm just going to sprinkle my embossing powder over our ink and heat set this. Now here's a really good example of where some of that stray embossing powder landed. Even though I treated it with my anti-static powder, if I were to heat set this, these little droplets would remain. So you want to make sure that you get those pieces off. And what I like to do is just use a dry paintbrush and just brush them off like that. Okay, let me go ahead and heat set this. Now I want to move the hexagons back to my card front, and I'm just going to dry fit them once again. And this is where you really want to take your time and line them up. If they don't line up, it's not going to look right. So with this type of shape, it's really, really key to slow down and really make sure that you're lining them up perfectly. So what I'm going to do is start with my first row and glue down my first hexagon. That will kind of set the line for the rest of these. So you can use a T-ruler, which I think would work really, really well. And again, using wet glue gives you just enough time to make sure that you can wiggle them around and line them up. All right, I'm just going to use my T-ruler. I'm lining it up with the edge of my card and the point of that first hexagon so that when I do the next one, I can make sure that they're pretty close to straight. Okay, and now I'm going to turn it and just make sure that vertically I have about the same amount of space between each one. So making sure that this space here is as equal as possible. Okay, now I'm going to keep gluing until our pattern comes together. And you can see if you look at this card from the side, all of that dimension that we added with the cut cardstock behind really lends itself beautifully to this design. This design, I think, looks beautiful just as it is, but if you want to add some additional embellishments, you can look in your stash to see, do you have smaller items that you could add on top of the hexagons to add a little bit more interest? All right, so from my stash, I found a cute little bow die, and I went ahead and cut that out of the pink foil paper that's in the kit. I think I want to add that to one of the hexagons. And then from Studio Katia, I brought back out my clear drops, and I think these might be interesting to add a few of these as well. All right, I think I like that placement. I'm going to go ahead and glue these down. I'm using art glitter glue, and it does dry clear. So these little droplets from Studio Katia will dry nice and clear. And then I'm just going to add my cute little bow right to the middle of this hexagon. All right, to finish off our matching envelope, I'm just going to take the rest of these little hexagons that I had cut out when I was designing the card and just add them to the lower left corner. And then my last one, this cute little bird. To finish off the inside of the card, I went ahead and cut one of the scraps that I had left of the blue paper, and then also a thin strip of this same rose-colored foil cardstock that comes in the kit, just to kind of tie it all in. I think I'm going to glue them along this lower edge, so I do want to trim them down a little bit. So I think I'll mark with my pencil. I want to cut it right about there. And I'm going to start by gluing this little pink strip, since it's so narrow. I'm going to glue it right on top of this blue patterned paper, kind of along one edge. And then I can add this strip to my lower edge. Okay, so that completes our cute little hexagon card and our matching envelope.